David, I'm sure all the people have been waiting, to hear from you and so on and so forth. Like I said earlier, if they couldn't hear me, but I'll say it quickly, I've had the greatest pleasure in my life to meet a man such as yourself. And, I don't creep, I don't do anything like that with people. What I say is the truth. And I've been hugely impressed by your ideas, your theories, and this, that, and the other. You've come an awful long way. You're well renowned in many, many ways. Sometimes loved in a big style, sometimes feared, sometimes middle of the road. It's just lovely to have you on. At this moment in time, David, because you've been so gracious to come on, what is your feelings? I'm going to ask you a question. You're not expecting this, okay? Can you tell me, I know you'll tell me honestly as well, do you believe in spirit?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I've done all my best jokes now. Well, we thought we were on air but weren't. Done all my best stories, so it's going to get really boring from now on. For me, Derek, what we are, what the I is a state of awareness, a state of being aware.
Yeah.
And all this illusion and almost diversion we call form of race and culture. These are not who we are. These are our experiences. Yeah. Now, we can potentially expand our awareness, what we are aware of, out into infinity, and therefore tap into endless other realities, endless other kind of fountains of knowledge, of intuitive knowing, of inspiration, of insight. Or, and I think this is what is systematically done, we can become so focused in the five senses that we think the I is the label, the name, the income bracket, the family history, the life story, the race, the religion, the background. And when we do that, of course, we see ourselves in terms of limitation. We see ourselves in terms of I can't, because that's how it seems. We also see ourselves as apart from everyone else and everything apart from everything else. Whereas what my view is that if you get to that point of I, that point of simple state of awareness, and don't self-identify with the labels and see them as experiences, you can reach levels of awareness where you realize that everything is connected to everything else and everything is an expression of everything else. So I would say that you and Paul and I now are different points of attention within the same state of infinite awareness. And how focused, myopic, or how expanded that point of attention is depends basically on our self-identity. And of course, what's happening all the time from cradle to grave, it's one of the things I've written in detail about, is if you look at a human life, it's basically a perceptual download. From coming into this world to leaving, we're constantly bombarded. I call it the postage stamp consensus. It's a narrow band of a sense of the possible, what is, what isn't, what's possible, what's not possible, a sense of reality, which is basically, like I say, myopic. And people live in this channel of perception, and it's all they get from the mainstream media. It's what they get from the mainstream everything. It's what they get from the so-called education system. It's overwhelmingly what they get from their parents, because their parents have been through the system and downloaded the perception. And it's also defended by this strange human trait we've fallen for, which is the crime of being different. So if you are different to this perceived postage stamp normal, this perceptual download, then you're either mad or bad or both. And you've got this constant peer pressure to conform to this communal sense of normal. And very early on in my life, I'm sure in yours, I started to question this sense of normal. And I just knew there was something beyond it. And what's happened in the last 30 years is, especially, at the start when I went through all that ridicule, is I stepped off the postage stamp and I thought, I'm going to explore possibility outside of the norm. And when you do, what you realize is there is a whole panorama, a whole vista of knowledge, awareness, insight, understanding, waiting for anybody who will decide that they're going to seek their own truth and not just download someone else's. And I think it's an arrogance beyond belief if people just took a breath and looked at it, that anyone should insist that someone else conforms to their belief system. What would happen, and it is happening. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in the last 2 years, number of people that are looking at things that they never looked at before. But if we would set ourselves free and allow us to explore possibility without rigid barriers and fences and prison cells that say you can't believe that, you can't say that, you can't have this opinion, then there would be an absolute unleashing of human potential and human understanding, the like of which we've never seen in the same time period. But of course, that few which wants to control the many could not do that if the many were in that state of expanded awareness and free thinking exploration. The way the few control the many is to get the many to basically have a communal belief system that is narrow, that gets people to see themselves as little me instead of infinite me, and that sees everything as apart from everything else. So you've got all the fault lines of divide and rule to set the target population at war with itself. And therefore, the last thing this force wants is free-thinking, open-minded, open-hearted people. It wants closed-minded, rigid thinking, and also, at the same time, people who, having accepted the rigidity, then insist that everyone else accepts the rigidity as well. Thus, the human race has become the prisoner and the prison warder of its own sense of reality. It's like I've said many times, we laugh at sheep because we say, sheep follow the one in front, just follow the shepherd without question. And anyone that gets out of line, the sheepdog comes, symbolizing fear to get them back in line. But humanity has been allowed itself to become so programmed that we've dispensed with a sheepdog. We don't need a sheepdog. We keep each other in line. I've challenged that for 30 years because I will not conform to what someone else tells me to think. I'll think what I want to think. Thank you very much.
Good man. Can I ask you another question? I hope it's not too far reaching. I know you'll answer me very truthfully. Do you believe in the words I use, the infinite and infinite power? Do you believe in there is a power? And if there is a power beyond that, okay, do you believe in a creative form that's created us? Do you believe we come from water? David, I'm always interested to find out what you think.
Well, I think what exists is a state of consciousness.
Yes.
And there are different levels of this consciousness in the sense of its self-awareness. This consciousness can express itself as being an awareness of the fact that it is all that is, has been, and ever can be. Yeah. Or it can perceive itself as Ethel on the checkout. I've got no power. I'm just Ethel. Nothing ever happens to me. And these are two states of perception. And when you look at the stadium on which life is played out, it's the stadium called perception. Because if you have a perception, for instance, of I'm Ethel on the checkout, you'll have a certain experience. That perception will create a feedback loop of producing Ethel on the checkout life.
Mm-hmm.
But if Ethel re-self-identified and realized that she is a point of attention with an infinite awareness having an experience called Ethel, then that expansion of self-identity comes from and produces an expansion of awareness, the amount of the scale of this consciousness that you're now tapping into. And that creates a very different feedback loop between perception and experience. In other words, life transforms, starts to become an adventure rather than just an existence, just a survival. And you start to realize that because perception is dictating experience, we are the ones in control of our lives. However, if we don't realize that, then, and we're being manipulated by a force that does, then what it can do is download our perception through this process I'm talking about from cradle to grave.
Yes.
And if we accept that download of perception, which I call the postage stamp consensus, then that feedback loop with experience will be on the basis of the postage stamp consensus. It will be a very limited feedback loop producing a very limited possibility of experience. Because I remember, when my mind exploded in 1991, that my life dramatically changed. When I re-self-identified from being David Icke, born in Leicester in 1952, to being an infinite state of awareness, having an experience as David Icke, born in Leicester in 1952, life started to become this extraordinary synchronistic adventure in which amazing, quote, coincidences were happening. Some people would call it miraculous things were happening. But they're not. It's just that you were interacting, this interaction between perception and experience was happening in a much more expanded way. Thus, the experience you could have became much more expanded. Instead of every day being the same and a drudge, it became an adventure. Not because you were suddenly better than anyone else, but you were just interacting with possibility and probability in a much more expanded way. And this is what happens when you opened your mind. I mean, I'll tell you a story, a quick one. These sort of things have happened to me for nearly 30 years. And they almost become matter of fact. They've happened so often. But there was one that really struck me. There's a film crew that from California, from Los Angeles, making a film about my life and work. And they came over to film me over the last week, doing some talks and also come to the Isle of Wight. And obviously, I'm talking about freedom. I'm talking about the need to be free and the fact that our freedom's being taken away and all this stuff. And I took them right at the end of the day to ride pier on the Isle of Wight. Because we were just talking about, when I was a kid and I used to come here on holiday, I used to stand on that pier and I used to watch the steam trains coming in and out, going up and down the pier. It was lovely. And right next to the pier, which you look down on from the pier, was the beach where I used to sit as a kid when I was on holiday. Just a little beach next to the pier. And when we were filming, we were talking about this. One of the film crew shouted, "Have a look at this," and walked across, looked down from the pier onto that beach where I used to sit back in the 50s and 60s. And there was a mother and two children who they were just finishing drawing two massive words in the sand, both of them freedom. And the chances of that, the fact that we were there at the time, they were even in England at the time, it could have been another time. The
Yes.
fact that it was the beach where I sat as a kid, that the film up to that point, I've been talking about freedom and the need to preserve freedom from what is happening, which is incredible levels of censorship now. And it all coming together. And I don't know why they did it. It was just a mother and two kids, and they were writing two words, freedom, twice, massively in the beach. But these things have been happening to me year after year after year after year. Not because I'm special. No, we're all points of attention, the same consciousness. But because once you start freeing your mind and freeing your perceptions to flow into realms of possibility that the postage stamp consensus keeps you from, then your life starts to produce these things, because that's the way life should be. You know, humanity goes through life because of this perceptual programming, symbolically with its hands tied behind its back and a ball and chain on each foot. We express in our lives a tiny fraction of who we are and our own potential to dictate our own experience, because we've been manipulated not to know how that dynamic operates between perception and experience. This is why someone who thinks they're little me has a little me life. Someone who thinks they're infinite me has infinite me life. But the only difference between them is two different perceptions. And it saddens me and also drives me on to see what people could be if only they would free their minds from the program.
Absolutely. You know, I agree with wholeheartedly. So much of that. I've learned so much in that description and form of what you said in this short space of time. Paul, I'm really sure there's something that you'd really like to either ask or put to David, something that's been on your mind as a medium, as a man, as a free thinker. Is there anything you want to speak to?
Well, I really want to kind of follow on more about what David was just saying. I mean, David, here in Portsmouth, I have two development classes where I teach my students about becoming a medium. And listening to what you said, in fact, we only had a very similar conversation with one of the classes yesterday, where I say to them, if you can free your mind, very similar to what you've been saying, if you can free your mind, if you can free yourself from your restraints and who you believe you are, you don't need me, because you're going to be able to do it yourself, and it's going to come.
What I would say to people, what I do say to people, is just change your self-identity. Just do it for a month and see how life changes. Where instead of going through the next month saying I'm Bill Brown, drive a bus in Portsmouth, I am infinite awareness, all that is, has been, and ever can be, having an experience as Bill Brown.
Yeah.
And it's because then the experience ceases to be the governor, and consciousness awareness, the self-identity with consciousness, becomes the governor. Because once you fall for the trap of self-identifying with your experience and all these endless labels, and of course the labels are subdividing now into smaller and smaller bubbles of self-identity, then you're in the realm of limitation. Everything seems apart from everything else. Everything seems limited. Everything seems I can't. When you believe in for instance, in the world being solid and physical, then what does that tell you? That tells you that virtually nothing is possible. When you realize that actually this world we think is so solid is actually a holographic illusion which we're decoding, then you realize that what we think of and experience as limitation of physicality is actually a malleable a malleable reality that we can change in ways that
Yeah.
people don't think that it's possible.